On August 9, 1969, the world was shaken by the tragic news of the brutal murder of Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant, and her friends, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent, at her residence. The heinous crime sent shockwaves across the globe and sent the world into a state of fear and confusion. However, what the world did not know at the time was that the mastermind behind this gruesome act was none other than Charles Manson, a man who was to become infamous for his evil and manipulative ways. Charles Manson's life began in a rather unfortunate circumstance. He was born on November 12, 1934, to Kathleen Maddox, a 16-year-old promiscuous teenager who drank too much and earned money through prostitution, and a 24-year-old con artist named Colonel Walker Henderson Scott, who had lied to Kathleen that he was an Army colonel. When Kathleen told him she was pregnant, he lied to her that he had been called on Army business and never returned. Before Manson's birth, Kathleen married William Eugene Manson, but they divorced in 1937 due to Kathleen's gross neglect of duty. Charles retained William's last name, Manson. Kathleen was too young, immature, and unpredictable to provide a stable environment for a young child. She appeared to have no maternal instinct and would often leave the child to fend for himself while she went off on one of her benders. As a result, the baby was known as No-Name Maddox for the first few weeks of life until his mother seemed to settle on Charlie. As an adult, Charlie often related that his mother was once in a cafe with him on her knee when the waitress offered to buy the baby from her. Kathleen's asking price was a pitcher of beer, and having consumed it, she simply walked out and left Charlie to the woman. According to Charlie, his uncle took 4 days to track him down and return him home. When Charlie was 6 years old, his mother and uncle decided to rob a gas station. They were both caught, convicted and sent for 5 years to Moundsville State Prison. The boy was put into the care of his strictly religious grandparents, but after a few months, he went to live with his aunt and uncle in McMeshan, West Virginia. The environment was very different to anything Charlie had previously known. His aunt, unlike his sister, was regimented and disciplined. She was also strictly religious. Her husband, Bill, was even more fervent in his faith than his wife. A strict disciplinarian, he considered Charlie to be a sissy. On the first day of school, he sent the boy to class in a dress to teach him how to fight. Charlie soon adapted to this very different kind of life and grew to enjoy his new regimented routine. The 2 years between 6 and 8 would prove to be some of the most stable of his young life. But then his mother was released from prison in 1942 and immediately took him back. Kathleen was more unstable than ever. She preferred a life of promiscuity and alcohol abuse to maternal domesticity. Constantly in trouble with the law and with no money for food and board, they constantly moved around the Midwest. According to Manson, at the age of 9, he set his school on fire and had to drop out. The transient life that he was forced to live shaped the type of boy that Charlie would become. He kept to himself, living his life through his imagination. He was constantly watching, taking things in and dreaming of a future free of his no-hope mother. He also learned how to become a very accomplished thief. In 1947, at the age of 13, Manson was placed in the Gibault School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, a school for male delinquents run by Catholic priests. Kathleen promised to visit him often, but she never did. Gibault was a strict school, where punishment for even the smallest infraction included beatings with either a wooden paddle or a leather strap. Manson ran away from Gibault and slept in the woods, under bridges and wherever else he could find shelter. He then fled home to his mother but was promptly returned. Just 10 months into his incarceration, Charlie escaped. He robbed a grocery store to get some money, and when that ran out, he stole other things, including a bicycle. He got caught in the act of making off with the bike and soon found himself back in confinement. This time, he was sent to Indiana Juvenile Center. But after just 2 days, he stole some cutters and freed not only himself but 30 other boys. This time, the escaped young felon stole not a bike, but rather a car. But the 13-year-old could hardly see over the steering wheel and was apprehended within hours of his escape. When he ended up in juvenile court, he was surprised to see his mother. His spirits were dashed, however, when she testified that she would not take him in. The somewhat sympathetic judge sent Charlie to Father Flanagan's Boys Town. But the stay here was almost as short as his last incarceration. After just 4 days, he ran off with another young offender, Blackie Nelson. They stole a car, which they subsequently crashed. Still, they made their way to the home of Blackie's uncle, a World War II veteran and an underworld figure who gave the young hoodlums free board and food in exchange for the proceeds from armed robberies that he had them commit. During the third robbery, the 2 boys were caught. This time, Charlie was sent to the Indiana School for Boys in Plainfield. Here, he stayed for 3 years. Charlie would later claim that his small stature led him to be constantly raped and sodomized by other inmates as well as by the school employees. He also recalled that he was constantly picked on by the guards who would continually find fault with him, beating him with leather straps and wooden clubs. One night after being gang raped by a group of older boys, he beat one of his attackers to just short of the point of death with an iron bar as the boy lay sleeping. Charlie then placed the iron bar under the bed of one of the other attackers, successfully implicating him in the attack. Charlie was exhibiting a trait that would characterize his personality as an adult. This was that he would hold his anger in for a time, only for it to explode later in an orgy of violence. Over the 3 years he spent at Plainfield, Charlie escaped no less than 18 times. He escaped with 2 other boys in February 1951. The 3 escapees robbed filling stations while attempting to drive to California in stolen cars until they were arrested in Utah. For the federal crime of driving a stolen car across state lines, Manson was sent to Washington, D.C.'s National Training School for Boys, a minimum security institution. Here things were very different to what Charlie had known at Plainfield. The facility was well run, the boys were treated well, and a genuine focus was placed on rehabilitation. Charlie liked it there, but he had no interest in being rehabilitated. He'd do his time, but then he'd get back out to the life of crime he knew was waiting for him. Around the age of 15, Charlie was given a psychiatric assessment. He was found to be aggressive, antisocial, and illiterate. A caseworker reported that the boy was severely emotionally traumatized and in serious need of psychiatric treatment. It was also noted that he had a higher than normal aptitude for music. On October 24, 1951, Charlie was transferred to the National Bridge Honor Camp in Petersburg, Virginia. 3 months later, just weeks before his parole hearing, he sodomized another inmate while holding a razor blade to his neck. Charlie was reclassified as extremely dangerous and transferred to a tougher high-security facility, the Federal Reformatory at Petersburg, Virginia. After 7 months of the Federal Reformatory, Charlie had racked up 8 major violations. He was classified as defiantly homosexual, dangerous, and safe only under supervision with assaultive tendencies. Towards the end of 1952, he was sent to a higher security facility still. There, to the surprise of everybody, he transformed into a model prisoner. He took lessons in reading and math and began working in the vehicle maintenance department. On January 1, 1954, he was given a Meritorious Service Award for his scholastic achievements. His application to his studies and his apparent change of attitude led to Charlie being paroled on May 8, 1954. He was put in the care of his aunt and uncle, but within a month, the now 19-year-old was back living with his mother, a newly released from prison. 6 months after his release, in January 1955, Charlie married a hospital waitress by the name of Rosalie Jean Willis. Shortly thereafter, a son, Charles Manson Jr., was born. Charlie worked at a low-income job, augmenting his pay by stealing cars. He used one of those stolen cars to move his wife and baby to Los Angeles. The car had been taken from Ohio, and authorities were able to track it down. Charlie was charged with a federal crime for taking the car across state lines. He was given 5 years probation, but when he failed to show up to a subsequent hearing, he was arrested. With his probation revoked, Charlie was sent for 3 years to the prison at Terminal Island in San Pedro, California. Manson received visits from Rosalie and his mother, who were now living together in Los Angeles. In March 1957, when the visits from his wife ceased, his mother informed him Rosalie was living with another man. 2 years later, she obtained a decree of divorce. In September of 1958, Charlie was released on 5 years of parole. He was now extending his criminal earning potential by becoming a pimp. He had a 16-year-old girl working for him. He was also receiving additional support from a girl with wealthy parents. Over the next year, he roamed around California and New Mexico, committing crimes and repeatedly coming across the law. In September 1959, he pleaded guilty to a charge of attempting to cash a forged United States Treasury check, which he claimed to have stolen from a mailbox. The latter charge was later dropped. He received a 10-year suspended sentence and probation after a young woman named Leona Ray Candy Stevens, who had an arrest record for prostitution, made a tearful plea before the court that she and Manson were deeply in love and would marry if Charlie were freed. He continued pimping women in violation of the Mann Act, which prohibits transportation for immoral purposes of women and girls. He was therefore arrested in June in Laredo, Texas, and for violating the terms of his probation he was ordered to serve 10 years at the United States Penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington. While serving his sentence, he learned to play the guitar and became interested in Scientology. During his time at McNeil Island, he also became obsessed with the Beatles. Charlie had an inflated appreciation of his musical talent, claiming that he would, with the right backing and training, be even bigger than the Beatles. Charlie became friends with an inmate by the name of Alvin Karpus, who was a former member of the infamous Ma Barker gang. He taught Charlie how to play the steel guitar. This further fueled his musical obsession, and in 1966, Charlie's prison record noted that he spent most of his free time writing songs, accumulating 80 or 90 of them in a single year. Karpus later commented on the Charlie that he knew at that time. He recalled that Manson was a master manipulator of other people. Prison authorities also noted that he had a tremendous drive to call attention to himself. In June 1966, Charlie was sent once again to Terminal Island, this time in preparation for early release. When the day arrived on March 21, 1967, he had spent more than half of his 32 years behind bars. He requested that the authorities let him stay in jail, but he was told that he had to leave. And so he wandered into the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco with $35 in his pocket and no plans except for a desire to make it big in the music business. Charlie moved into an apartment in Berkeley and made money by panhandling. While he had gotten to know a 23-year-old library assistant at UC Berkeley named Mary Brunner, he quickly won her over and moved into her apartment. Manson then met teenage runaway Lynette Fromm, later nicknamed Squeaky, and convinced her to live with him and Brunner. Before long, they were sharing Brunner's residence with 18 other women. Manson targeted individuals for manipulation who were emotionally insecure and social outcasts. Charlie introduced Mary and the other girls to drugs, and before long, Mary had quit her job and become a devoted follower of Manson. The family was beginning to take shape. With his female entourage and his guitar, Charlie merged perfectly into the hippie culture that was then in full bloom in San Francisco. He refined his role as a spiritual master, a guru, and a prophet. He used mind control techniques to get girls to do whatever he wanted. Most of the girls he gathered around him came from troubled backgrounds and suffered from insecurities that left them directly open to Charlie's manipulations. Manson allegedly taught his followers that they were the reincarnation of the original Christians and that the establishment could be characterized as the Romans. As well as breaking down their inhibitions with mind control techniques, he used LSD and amphetamines to control his ever-expanding harem. Manson would encourage group LSD trips and take lower doses himself to keep his wits about him. After about 9 months of living in and around San Francisco, Charlie began to despair of the place. It had, he asserted, become too overrun with African Americans, and crime was rampant. Of course, their family was doing their bit to add to those crime statistics. They stole credit cards and used counterfeit money to get what they needed. They also stole a big yellow bus and painted it black. Charlie and his followers took to traveling by bus down the California coastline, as far as Mexico and Texas, partying and committing more crimes. After 18 months of extended travel, they finally settled in Topanga Canyon, near Los Angeles, in a 2-story house. It was here that Charlie began gathering some male members to the family. The first was a teenager named Bobby Bosa Lyle, who turned up one night for a party and then stayed on as Charlie's right-hand man. Bobby had been staying with his music teacher Gary Hinman not far from the Manson home. Bobby recruited an 18-year-old named Leslie Van Houten to the family in June of 1968. Around that time, Charlie and some of the girls traveled to Los Angeles, where they met up with a record executive at Universal Studios. Former JL friend Phil Kaufman had arranged the meeting. This was Charlie's entry into the rich jet-set crowd, and he turned on all of his charm to make a good impression. Soon, the family was rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous posh parties in the Hollywood Hills. In the late spring of 1968, Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson was driving away from Malibu Beach when he happened to pick up 2 hitchhikers, Crane Winkle and Ella Jo Bailey. The girls were part of the Manson family, and they quickly agreed to go back to his Beverly Hills home. The 3 made love that afternoon, and Wilson left for a recording session, promising to return later to take up where they left off. When Wilson returned home in the early hours of the following morning, he was surprised to see that a full-scale party was underway. He was greeted in the driveway by a short man with a scraggly beard who approached him, dropped to his knees, and began kissing his feet. The girls whom Dennis had met earlier came running out declaring, "This is the guy we were telling you about. This is Charlie." Inside his home, Wilson found 12 more women, most of them topless, lying around and smoking marijuana. Manson told him that the girls were all there for Wilson's pleasure. Wilson was impressed with the way that Charlie held over the women. He welcomed the family with open arms, and his home became the regular venue for Charlie's orchestrated orgies. Wilson called Manson the Wizard, and began inviting influential showbiz friends to come and meet him. Eventually, Wilson's manager, Nick Grillo, became fed up with the influence and expenses that Manson. In September 1968, Wilson recorded a Manson song for the Beach Boys, originally titled "Cease to Exist," but reworked as "Never Learn Not to Love," as a single B-side released the following December. The writing was credited solely to Wilson. When asked why Manson was not credited, Wilson explained that Manson relinquished his publishing rights in favor of about $100,000 worth of stuff. Around this time, the family destroyed 2 of Wilson's luxury cars. Wilson eventually distanced himself from Manson and moved out of the Sunset Boulevard house, leaving the family there. Virtually all of Wilson's household possessions were stolen by the family. The members were evicted from his home 3 weeks before the lease was scheduled to expire. Rumors were also spreading of the children of the rich and famous being given drugs and having sex under Charlie's direction. Suddenly, the door to the Hollywood elite lifestyle was slammed shut. Charlie's planned music career was also shut down. This caused a familiar build-up of jealousy, anger and rage that would inevitably find expression in violence. Manson managed to convince the owner of a former Western movie set, the Span Ranch in Chatswood, not far from Topanga Canyon, to allow the family to live in the abandoned property. The family now moved to the ranch, getting by stealing and scavenging. Charlie took to quoting the Bible to family members as they gathered around a bonfire during the evenings. Manson became fixated on the idea of an imminent apocalyptic race war between America's black minority and the larger white population. Manson told some of the family that black people would rise up and kill the entire white population except for Manson and his followers, but that they were not intelligent enough to survive on their own. They would need a white man to lead them, and so they would serve Manson as their master. He also interpreted Beatles songs explaining that the lyrics were directed towards them. He was obsessed with one song, Helter Skelter, telling his followers that the song envisioned an apocalypse brought on by a race war of blacks killing whites. The blacks would win, he said, but it would then turn to Manson to lead the new world. The revolution. For Charlie, however, the revolution was taking too long. He wanted it to happen immediately. He began preparing family members for a series of actions that would precipitate the black uprising. The first step would be to release an album of music that would contain subtle messages that would foment the Black Revolution. On May 8, 1969, Terry Melcher, a producer who had met Charlie through Dennis Wilson, arrived at Span Ranch to listen to Charlie and the girls sing. Melcher made promises but never followed through on them. On July 25, 1969, Charlie ordered Bobby Beausoleil and two women to the home of Gary Hinman, the music teacher Bobby used to live with. Manson had heard that Hinman had inherited $20,000 and wanted it. Hinman refused to hand over the money. Charlie was called and soon arrived. After screaming at him, Charlie pulled out a sword, cut off his ear and slashed his face. Charlie then left with instructions to get the money or kill the man. After 3 days, Bobby stabbed his former teacher to death. Before leaving, he and the girls wrote the words, "Political Piggy" on the wall, along with a panther paw in red to lay the blame on the Black Panther movement. Bobby Beausoleil was arrested for murder on August 6, 1969, after being caught driving around in Hinman's car. Police found the murder weapon in the tire well. Manson was now ready to get his revenge on Terry Melcher, the record producer who had let him down. On the evening of August 8, he directed followers, Linda Kasabian, Susan Atkins and Patricia Kranewinkle, to the house where he believed Melcher was living, with instructions to totally destroy everyone in it, making it as gruesome as possible. The house was located at 10,050 Cielo Drive, but Melcher didn't live there anymore. It was now occupied by a famous director, Roman Polanski, and his beautiful, 8-month pregnant wife, Sharon Tate. That night, Polanski was in Europe on a film project. His wife was entertaining guests at the property: hairdresser Jay Sebring, screenwriter Wojciech Frykowski, and coffee empire heiress Abigail Folger, who was Frykowski's girlfriend. Also present on the property were 19-year-old caretaker William Garretson and his friend, 18-year-old Stephen Earl Parent. Arriving at the property around midnight, Watson climbed a telephone pole near the gate and cut the phone line to the house. The group then backed their car to the bottom of the hill that led to the estate before walking back up to the house. Thinking that the gate might be electrified or equipped with an alarm, they climbed a brushy embankment to the right of the gate and entered the grounds. Just then, car headlights came up from further up on the property. Ordering the women to lie down in the bushes, Watson approached the vehicle and leveled his .22 caliber rifle at the driver, 18-year-old Stephen Parent. Watson first slashed him with a knife and then shot him 4 times in the chest. Watson ordered the women to help push the car up the driveway. Watson then ordered Linda Kasabian to keep watch down by the gate. He and the other 2 women made their way into the house. The occupants were quickly gathered together in the lounge. When asked by Frykowski who they were, Watson replied, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Watson then began to tie the heavily pregnant Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring together by their necks with the rope he'd brought and slung over a beam. When Sebring protested over the rough handling of Sharon, Watson shot him and then stabbed him 7 times. Meanwhile, Frykowski began struggling with Susan Atkins, who repeatedly stabbed him in the legs and torso. Still, Frykowski managed to get to the front door. Seeing this, Watson rushed after him, meeting up with him on the porch and smashing his head with gun butt before shooting him twice. The other girl, Folger, had managed to escape out onto the yard. She was chased by Patricia Kranewinkle, who tackled her and then stabbed her to death. The only remaining victim was now Sharon Tate. As she lay on the lounge floor with a rope around her neck, she begged to be able to live long enough to have her child. But her pleas were ignored, and either Watkins or Atkins stabbed her repeatedly, including in the abdomen, until both she and her unborn baby were dead. Remembering Manson's instructions to leave a sign on the walls, Atkins wrote the word "pig" with Tate's blood. Atkins claimed she did this to copycat the Hinman murder scene to get Beausoleil out of jail, who was in custody for that murder. The very next day, the family struck again. This time, the victims were Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Unhappy with the messiness of the previous night's killings, this time Charlie went with the group to show them how it was done. Different accounts have been given about the exact happenings that night, but we do know that Manson was in the house and that he orchestrated the tying up of the couple. He then left with the orders that the couple be killed. Before leaving, the words "War, Rise, Death to Pigs," and "Helter Skelter" were written with the blood of the victims on the walls and the refrigerator door. The murders caused a huge panic throughout Hollywood. The pressure was now on to solve the heinous crimes. The police got nowhere until they finally linked the Hinman murder to the Tate-LaBianca killings. They knew that Bobby had lived with a group of hippies at Span Ranch, so they decided to pay the ranch a visit. Bobby's girlfriend had told police that Charlie Manson, the hippie guru, had ordered the killing of Hinman. Still, there was no evidence linking the group to the later murders. Then in October, 24 Manson family members, including Charlie, were arrested on charges of arson and grand theft. Susan Atkins was also taken into custody, and it was she who first began to spill the beans. She bragged to a cellmate about killing Sharon Tate, giving a detailed account and implicating Charlie as the mastermind. At the same time, police interviewed a member of the Straight Satan's motorcycle gang who was a Manson acquaintance. He told them that Manson had recently been bragging about knocking off 5 people. The first piece of physical evidence was the fingerprint of Patricia Renwinkle, which was found on Sharon Tate's bedroom door. When other pieces of physical evidence were recovered, the police were ready to send the case to court. Manson and the 4 people who had committed the Tate-LaBianca murders were found guilty and sentenced to death. Midway through the penalty phase, Manson shaved his head and trimmed his beard to a fork. He told the press, "I am the devil, and the devil always has a bald head." In what the prosecution regarded as belated recognition on their part that imitation of Manson only proved his domination, the female defendants refrained from shaving their heads until the jurors retired to weigh the state's request for the death penalty. These penalties, however, would never be imposed. In 1972, the California Supreme Court declared the state's death penalty law unconstitutional. Manson's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Charles Manson died on November 19, 2017, of cardiac arrest, having spent nearly 50 years behind bars for his orchestrating the crimes that shook the world in 1969. He was 83 years of age. Please like, subscribe and share for more content like this.